Bruning Army Airfield was located a few miles northeast of the small rural community of Bruning, Nebraska, located near the border of Kansas. The airfield had few amenities. It consisted mainly of the post exchange or grocery store, an officers' club, chapel and small medical clinic. The barracks had no air conditioning in the summer. They were heated with small coal-burning stoves in the winter. The flight line was made of 3 hangars and a large pad to hold the many variety of aircraft at the base. The main aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt, was the reason for the airfield's existence. Pilots who graduated from Air Corps flight schools from around the country were sent to Nebraska to learn to fly the most heavily armed fighter in America's arsenal. Nicknamed the Jug, the P-47 was the most hated and most loved amongst pilots. In spite of its isolated location on the Great Plains of Nebraska, Bruning Army Airfield had many highly decorated combat-experienced pilots heading up the training school. Among these was Stanley Meadows, a 26-year-old captain from Sioux Rapids, Iowa. Meadows began his aviation career in 1939 while a student at Drake University. In April 1941, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. After receiving his wings, he was sent to the South Pacific, where he was assigned to the 89th Bombardment Group. It is believed he flew bomber escorts in a P-40 Warhawk. While in Australia, he was involved in a fighter aircraft crash. Eyewitness accounts state he was flying too low and too fast and lost control of the aircraft. His injuries were so severe he was offered a medical discharge. Opting to remain in the Air Corps, he was sent to Bruning Army Airfield, where he was assigned as the Assistant Director of Training. He had a reputation for being a pilot who consistently pushed the limits of his aircraft. He was known for his stern demeanor and had high expectations of those in his command. One airman under Meadows was Captain Robert Bowley, nicknamed Bud. He was an outgoing young officer from South Dakota with a zest for life and an enormous smile. Bowley was in charge of the 1st Squadron of pilot trainees in the 262nd Fighter Pilot Training School.
We met at St. Olaf College in Minnesota. He arrived in midterm and created a lot of excitement because he was a very good-looking young man. Everybody thought he was special. We immediately became close friends. I didn't realize at the time it was going to be serious.
During his summers off, Bowley worked for Bausch & Lomb in Chicago. Dolores would visit him every chance she could. Bud was offered a full-time position with the company and left school.
He had a job so we could get married when I graduated. New Year's Eve 1939, I got my diamond. We were married September 1st, 1940, and settled into an apartment in Chicago. I remember sitting on the floor reading the newspaper when I heard President Roosevelt on the radio telling about the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Bud immediately enlisted and was sent to flight school at Kelly Army Airfield in San Antonio. The washout rate amongst aviation cadets was extremely high, but Bud earned his wings with ease. Following graduation, he spent nearly a year on an isolated airbase in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. It was a duty he would never discuss with his family. In the spring of 1944, he arrived at Bruning Army Airfield and assumed command of the 1st Squadron. Richard Holcomb was overall director of pilot training at Bruning. He attended Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, but dropped out in March 1941. Sensing war was looming, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. When he arrived in Texas, he was less than impressed with what he experienced.
The flight instructors were all civilians, and in many cases had less flying time than I and several cadets. We soon found it was best not to mention this, as at least one cadet was flunked out because of attitude. I was then shipped to Randolph Field in San Antonio. This was my first taste of military life. The upperclassmen gave us a really rough time, and there were West Point grads all over the place. This is where I encountered the command to jump and found out the proper answer was how high, not why. That difference in opinion haunted me most of my military life.
Holcomb earned his wings and was sent to Langley, Virginia to learn to fly the P-40 Warhawk. He was then assigned to the 59th Pursuit Squadron of the 33rd Fighter Group and shipped to North Africa aboard the USS Chenango in November 1942.
The planes were packed so close together that you could not turn the props over. We worried about this. There was nothing to do but hope the engines would run okay. When we finally arrived off the coast of Casablanca, we didn't know if the French were going to oppose our landing. The next morning, a German sub fired torpedoes at a ship in our convoy. The captain of the Chenango immediately gave the order for our aircraft to be catapulted off his ship. We were quickly briefed and learned no one knew who had control of Lyautey Airfield. We were instructed to proceed to Gibraltar if we weren't able to land at Lyautey. We didn't have enough fuel for the alternative, so that solved the problem of where to land.
Holcomb flew countless missions in North Africa, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross with 4 oak leaf clusters. He quickly rose through the ranks, but his disdain for the strict discipline of military life didn't wane.
I often said I was a civilian pilot in uniform. I was a typical pursuit pilot living in an era of whiskey and wine and wild women. Buzzing was the thing of the day. Flying under bridges or down the beach at 10 feet and looking back at the path you left. Just raising Cain.
Holcomb arrived at Bruning to assume director of training duties in the spring of 1944. He had achieved the rank of major at only 23 years old. The base commander was Charles Steed, a 49-year-old colonel whose pilot license had been permanently revoked following a tragic civilian aviation accident on a dark November night in 1938. News of the tragedy adorned the cover of Life magazine. It became known worldwide. The war afforded Steed the second chance he wanted. However, the young pilots stationed at Bruning were not so quick to forgive or forget. His command would be plagued by disrespect, insubordination, and flagrant disobedience of orders. Summer at the 262nd Fighter Pilot Training School was just beginning to heat up.